Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to stand to this Truth Bomb Riff. This is Patrick Lovell coming to you on Thursday, October 23rd at approximately 11 a.m. my time. And first of all, I wasn't going to record because I had surgery yesterday to do Mohs on a spot on my nose. It kind of rhymes. And interestingly enough, they had to graft skin from the side of my face. And I'm supposed to leave this bandage on for 24 hours and not shower and that sort of thing. But I have a lot to say, but I'm going to try to say it as quickly as I can off the heels of the No Kings rally that I participated in on Saturday in front of 20,000 people in my hometown, which was just absolutely extraordinary. Of course, kudos to everybody who showed up, the 7 million people from the Dancing Frogs and the Blowing Kinneys from South Park and the Dancing Tyrannosaurus Rexes and all the satire and the wonderful signs and really everybody that came together with a lot of the leadership from, of course, Indivisible with Ezra Levin and Leah Greenberg, as well as I think the ACLU, and probably move on and many others that participated in terms of helping to organize. But it was really extraordinary. But I was left with this sort of sense, given the speech that I had, which was the right speech, and boy, did it feel remarkably invigorating and validating to in real time really pose the questions that I posed on this, platform for now. I think I'm up to 685 truth bombs. And it was like, there I was looking at 20,000 people asking the questions that they all wanted answers to because I saw them all on the signs. And the way I presented it was, I said, have you had enough? Have you had enough of? And then I started with Mike Johnson and all of the, insanity that is involved with him, as well as Stephen Miller and Pam Bondi on down the list. And then, of course, I talked about the just out of control dementia and ridiculous, whatever we're calling it, of our president, which of course he's not my president, but in the midst of being called terrorist for being anti-fascist. And I do want to clarify, and I've said this in a couple of truth bombs recently, as well as interviews, that I think it's important for you to understand this aspect, and I'm going to try to make it as quickly as possible. So incidentally, I should promote that we released our first documentary film that you can find for free at Corruption Incorporated or on YouTube. But the name of the title of the film, and I'll have it down in the description link below, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. And we actually shot that during the Occupy Wall Street movement. And we released it in 2014 and we had it on Amazon for a while and then we took it off because it wasn't really doing any business. And my partner has just released it with our new partners who are involved with this new effort to make it available on this website called Corruption Incorporated. But you can also get it on YouTube. So again, it'll be in the description. But what was really fascinating about that, and I just happened to watch it for the first time in many years, and it brought tears to my eyes in unbelievable ways because if you see it, you'll understand. But we basically position that film perfectly. And it's a trip because it mirrors exactly what's going on right now with No Kings and everything else. And in fact, the film that we made literally was to prevent everything that we're in the midst of. And I look at my kid and I look at all the situations that my wife and I went through at the time and now our ex-wife because this stuff just got too heavy a burden to carry and really just led to personal tragedy. But you know what? C'est la vie, right? Millions of us have gone through this, and that's really what drives me, to be honest with you. But also my commitment to truth and justice and liberty and justice for all, and more importantly, the integrity of our system, all of which are under siege by this incredible calamity of what we're in the midst of, which is why millions of us came to the streets to protest. But the question mark became, so what do we do next? And what I laid out is what I've been involved with our group called the New Untouchables. But I'm going to just kind of recalibrate it really quickly. But it is incredibly timely, all of the things that took place. So I'll also have below in this thread, especially on Blue Sky, if you watch this, that I'll put the 18-minute speech that I made to No Kings rally on Saturday. But I mentioned in there this initiative that we're underway that basically came out of our work from Forward 13, which was prologue, to create the kind that I've now just been informed that is probably going to be taken off the shelves. And I don't know if we're being quashed. I really don't know all the details. I'm kind of trying to work through it right now. And it is kind of like a kick to the gut. But I don't know, but I kind of have a feeling it could be. I mean, I could just speculate, but right. What I've learned recently was that Reuters, for example, reported that there's this sort of collusion between the Department of Justice and probably the FBI and other scenarios that are, targeting supposed Trump enemies, right? And it's kind of like the Red Scare for anybody who understood what happened during the time of McCarthy, Senator McCarthy, and then, of course, all things J. Edgar Hoover, which was significant during, obviously, the Cold War. And this is kind of a step and repeat of that, where, guys like George Soros or other foundations are being targeted and sued and up the ass of the administration that's, obviously got limited resources because it's the federal government. And, they can basically bankrupt people that can't fight back, or maybe they could, obviously fix the courts and so on and so forth. And, they can go after their perceived enemies and throttle down because all of the billionaires own all of the different, platforms and so forth. This is a comprehensive takeover by Big Brother. That's all it is. Okay. And we've seen this before throughout history. It's just that it's just now worse and bigger because of technology, which, interestingly enough, was the reason why I always stated, and what we stated in all of our promotional material for the work that we did in the con, is the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history. That, by the way, I add, that never ended. And one of the main reasons for that is because of what I just said, technology. We're closer together, more things can happen faster, more people get involved. This thing could spread around the world, so many times. And I'm talking about the financial side now. And, because that's really what we're talking about on a planet of what, I don't know, 9 billion people. I don't know if we're 7 billion, or yeah, I think it's 9 billion now. Might be 7 billion. Sorry, haven't been thinking about that number in a while. But the nature and the magnitude of what we're in the midst of, for those of you who are still kind of holding on for the midterms, right? Oh my God, there's 7 million of us. I feel more confident. We're going to get out in the streets. We're going to do this. And now I know that there's other people like me that are like, this is ridiculous, right? Wrong. It's going to take a sustained effort. It's going to take unbelievable amount of human capital and people out there getting on board and doing what has to be done. But like any organization or any movement, if it doesn't have organization, it's going to dissipate. And so this is just my perception of all of the great things that have taken shape from No Kings. I can tell you that the folks that are in charge of Indivisible have said that they have kind of pared themselves away from the DNC, I think, in terms of finance or budgeting and getting money from Think Blue, because Trump's upside the backside of Think Blue or Act Blue as well. Okay. So maybe they were forced to go independent in terms of funding, and they already had their sort of network and everything else. But, if we look at the Democratic Party, my friends, and we don't feel like they're rising to the level of what this calamity is that we're in the midst of, you're right. Because as I had said to the No Kings rally, you can't get clean if you're dependent on the junk that the billionaire junk has you addicted to. And that's politicians. They depend on the money. They'll tell you one thing and do another, and they'll all be in concert. And, if our sole focus is to get rid of Trump, that doesn't get rid of the Project 2025, Koch, Mercer, Adelson, and I could go on with 15 other billionaires that have been in this thing for like decades, honestly. And they know what they're doing. And they hired smart people who are bastards, but that are technocrats that know the system. And that's what gave us Doge and all of the other things that are happening. And not to mention, being able to pull the back door to the Supreme Court because they were ruthless. They got paid to do it, and they did it, and they delivered for their crime bosses. And oh yeah, by the way, it's kind of interesting that the FBI comes up with this massive fraud case against all of these criminal NBA players, and it turns out the biggest crime families that exist in the United States on this inside betting scandal that was just mind blowing in terms of its scope. But the New York Times said it was for, I think, revenue in compositely around the $7 million range. What I revealed to you from my collective work that just got quashed by our own people, which is the con that you could have seen at the con.tv, which no longer exists there because I'll find out. They're good people, but there's something going on. And I don't know, it's because if they've been targeted or, there's things going on behind the scenes that I don't know about. I don't have anything firm to really wrap my head around. But all I can say is that the con had to be out there from my perspective because if people can't get into the details or at least know that's a backstop, which they don't, by the way, because we've left this thing for free out there for 3 years and nobody's really gone there. I mean, it's gotten in the thousands, but it really should be seen by the millions because there was over 150 million people that got devastated by the 2008 great financial crisis, and now many more millions because of all the things that are happening under Trump. But it all happens because of what we showed you in the con that doesn't exist anywhere else. I can assure you it doesn't exist anywhere else. But the challenge is twofold. First, most of you out there don't have the bandwidth to be able to really plug in to understanding how the system works. You don't even know how the system works. And I'm not saying that to try to beleaguer you or discount you or anything like that. We all know what we know. And what I frequently say is that we all have to live within the four corners of our universe, which means that you go to school, you go as far as you can, you've got your job, you've got your pressures from your debt and also, the needs of your family and that sort of thing. That's kind of the typical American family. And you can't see the forest for the trees, and nobody's going to tell you. And meanwhile, all of media has been lying to you this whole time. And I say they've been pissing on our heads, telling us it's rain. And yeah, I've been validated 50 ways to Sunday. And still, it doesn't penetrate the tens of millions of people's minds who need to understand it. And now it's going to be adios time. And I'm just going to have to dance and deal with it and do whatever I have to do. But the long and the short of it is that, we've created this clean new deal behind you, right? And the way you got to get there is twofold. We've got this initiative with the new Untouchables, which were all of these superheroes that came out of the work that we did in the con, that came out of the Department of Justice and being regulators, high level regulators and state AGs and so forth, that have actually been fighting corruption for decades. In fact, that's what our country is tasked to do in the institutions, and they did their job to the tune of getting thousands of white collar executives indicted, convicted, and many thrown in prison. And these were for, you know, uh, serious criminal financial conspiracies that were in the billions and cost, thousands of people their livelihood, jobs, and the devastation is just, worse than really any terrorism that you can point your finger to. I call it financial terrorism, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. We weren't able to stem this because it's like a crack addict. What happens if you give a crack addict the combination to a safe filled with crack? You think he's going to stop? That's what we did to this financial system. We gave $71 trillion illegally to the financial system, and that was up until 2019. That was between 2009 and 2019. And I think that they're setting up for another, well, actually, it also included stuff that happened in 2023. It spanned literally the Obama administration, the Trump administration, as well as the Biden administration. And this had never been done before in American history before that. Okay. This is what I'm letting you know about. And oh, yeah, my name's Patrick Lovell. I'm a muckraking journalist. I did say that at the beginning. I'm a producer, an independent producer on an island on my own, trying to build networks of people that want to turn the tables on corruption, because it's going to take you, me, and everyone you see with the truth. That you've got to become the nuclear reaction vector to the Big Bang of truth to be able to force the light of truth into the darkness and the depravity of these lies of which we're in the midst of. I'll ask you this question. Think about how insane this is, right? You've got this president that got away with an insurrection, that ended up getting control of the Supreme Court because the billionaires in question that I'm telling you about, they got paid by these tens of trillions of dollars illegally to completely control the system. Why? Because they knew what I was telling you. And I guarantee you, all of their surrogates, from Russell Vogt to Steve Bannon to, quite frankly, Tucker Carlson and many, many others, they know exactly who I am. They know exactly what my work is. They they use it against you. And I'm trying to save us and save democracy and save the world. And it's not because I'm your savior. I'm the deliverer. It's the people that I've connected to, the new Untouchables, that know how to do this. And so we're working with the Government Accountability Project. They're the premier whistleblower protection scheme in the Beltway. And we've got access to thousands of cases that we're going to have to take to the state legislatures to get hearings, to make public, to turn the tables on this corrupt administration with the stories of truth. We've got to flood the zone with truth to create a cleanse of this ocean of madness and lies. But on the backside of that is the clean new deal. Because what we're talking about, and by the way, what you'll see if you happen to get to Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, which again, you can find on YouTube for free. And we released this in 2013, where we had more information in 2013 than 99% of the population has now. It's absolutely insane. We got it exactly right. In fact, it looked like it could have been shot now because of No Kings rallies and other things that are going on, but because we did it during the Occupy Wall Street movement. But we framed it asking three questions: what is democracy? What is our financial system? And then ultimately, what is our patriotism in the context of the American dream? Which were the three-legged stool to really fully understand what's going on. And what I was able to show was that and it was prologue to all of the elements that came through in the con, but it just basically showed that we have this hybrid financial fossil fuel matrix, military industrial matrix that controls our government and really the whole world. And they basically blown up the world, to stuff their faces illegally with stolen trillions of dollars predicated on this global system. And what we had suggested in the Clean New Deal was to create the Clean New Deal, Forward 13, was to create a renewable energy paradigm that could, rising tide raises all ships, so that we recreate the middle class. That's what I did in 2013. Here we are in 2025, so that's 12, 13 years later, really. And ultimately, it all parlayed because I'm the conduit. You open up the door and you go through this labyrinth to discover everything I'm telling you is true. And you get to, okay, well, now I understand the problem. So what's the solution? The Clean New Deal that you can find at thecleannewdeal.org. And I'll just run through the four questions and the precepts to close us out of here. And hopefully you can share and really get involved like your life and the world depends on it, because it does. So you have to understand four questions. What is qualified immunity? What is judicial immunity? What is presidential immunity? What is the Electoral College? When you understand those four parts and you put all the pieces together like a Rubik's Cube, eureka, you're like, wait a second, the United States isn't what I thought it was. I'd say that most of us thought the United States is built on democracy, which is one person, one vote, that holds the system accountable and our elected officials who wouldn't get out of line because the American people would vote in their best interest so that the system would have, integrity, so that the laws would be executed faithfully for the people in a government of, by, and for the people. But as we qualified and we questioned from the very beginning of our journey, which took me this many years to really, close the loop on and get the whole story, was how did we go of, by, and for the people to of, by, and for the corruption? Well, through the toxicity of madness, of lying and deception, because they're pissing on your head, telling you what's right. Who's they? The whole system. What do you mean by the whole system? The government, the media, everybody. Honestly, even a bunch of the podcasters that have got good intentions, that have built great audiences by reacting, in a hysterical way every day. And I mean that, with all respect, because the system that we're in the midst of is insanity. So when you act with hysterical, like, what the fuck, then that means that you're conveying that you understand what's on the line. Oh yeah, no, it's the real deal. It's madness. And so when you understand that qualified immunity means that the police can shoot to kill without any accountability, that means the cops are above the law. When you have judicial immunity and the judges are above the law, well, then obviously all men aren't created equal. We put people in positions of power to rule over us, which is called tyranny. When especially you add a king to it, which we just had the No Kings March, because why? The American Revolution was all about, getting rid of King George III, but it was also about getting rid of the East India Trading Company, the Redcoats and the Navy. It was the power apparatus of the empire. That's what the American Revolution was about, to create a nation of, by, and for the people, predicated on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that would be achieved through the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, through which is, of course, separation of powers. Okay, that's the basics, right? The law and how laws get made, and ultimately what those laws do, and everything else can get a little bit more complicated, and in some cases very slippery, as we've seen once Trump stole the presidency after getting away with an insurrection that was basically baked into this billionaire scheme that none of us have been able to stop, because most of us have our heads in the sand and they don't understand how many senators and representatives even represented us, how the system of separation is supposed to work, and ultimately what the president is supposed to work. And so these bastards preyed on your ignorance. they bet the world, in a game of roulette, and they bet the future of the world that you wouldn't respond because you wouldn't know what to do. And so that is thus far really, vetting itself out to be true. Why? Yeah, we got 7 million people. The No Kings rally is moving, but I saw Hakeem Jeffries say that we're going to take down Trump corruption today. No, you're not. I saw on the front page of the New York Times that the NBA and all of these great players and legends and these dudes were fixing games with the mob, with the biggest families in the mob. And it was a huge story. It is a huge story coming out of what Kash Patel's FBI. And yeah, I'm fascinated in it. And trust me, I really want to know the details. But I think the sum total of what revenue we're talking about was right in the $7 million range. People, what I'm giving you is 71 trillion. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, or Larry Ellison. They're both worth about north of $400 billion and the most powerful people on the planet. Yeah, your boy Patrick here has the $71 trillion truth. That's why most of you haven't heard of me, because they've had to keep me quashed and had to keep me down. But I'm trying to do everything I can to break through. And thank you to my local No Kings rally for giving me the opportunity to speak. And of course, I'm engaged with the most brilliant criminal legal minds in the country whose expertise is corruption, which everybody's asking the question, what is the big C? Now, many of you will go capitalism, but it's corruption. Now, we could redefine capitalism to be, predatory capitalism run by monopolies through complicity and racketeering and all of these other things. But then we would just have to forego that there was ever a law, which of course is what we're in the midst of because we've got the lawless presidency. I think of Don as Don the Con Rico Pig and pedo protection racket. I mean, this is insane. But is it any more insane? The first thing I saw on my phone, my friends, when I was coming down from the speech where I talked to 20,000 people and I had this interaction, it was just magnificent. And I encourage you to watch the link below because you'll see the same thing. And I hope you share and subscribe and join me and unite with me and all of that other stuff. But the first thing I saw on my phone was Donald Trump flying some sort of, I think, F-15 and dive bombing, dropping dung on American citizens using Kenny Loggins' heavy highway to the danger zone. And of course, that was trending on Blue Sky a couple of days ago. Yeah, that's the situation that we're in the midst of. And I'll close it up like this. Oh, and I said the 4 questions. Okay, so let me just get through that, and then I'll get the precepts, and then I'll close it. Sometimes there's so much information that I just wish I could have you plug into my brain, and then suddenly wake up and see it like it's a scene out of God, Avatar, right? I think that happened in Avatar, maybe some other movies where people could see the whole light in like a nanosecond, right? The whole meaning of the world and the nature of the universe and all of that. It's kind of what I'm talking about. So I ended up with, I think I talked about the qualified immunity and a judicial immunity and a presidential immunity. One little caveat about judicial immunity. Look, those of you who are, attorneys or legal experts or people who follow the courts and that sort of thing, you know that it is actually judicial immunity in the federal courts, in the appeals court, in the third district, and so forth, that has held the line so far against the complete hostile takeover of this corrupt, corporate fascist scenario that we're in the midst of that has knighted the biggest idiot of all time, our king, which is unbelievable, Humpty Dumpty, right? But so I do acknowledge that. But at the same time, there was a literal backdoor at the Supreme Court where we funneled, I think, through Leonard Leo, the big hedge fund guy, and many others like Harlan Crow that were paying for Justice Thomas, and not to mention Judge Alito and so forth. Over $1 billion backdoored through a literal backdoor at the Supreme Court. The corruption is insane. And so should those that, are calling balls and strikes and basically lay down the law be able to be corrupt? What do you think the founders would have said about that? I think many of you could argue correctly that they probably would have said, well, yeah, that was kind of the intended purpose because of the Three-Fifths Statute and that we didn't really believe in democracy. We believed in a constitutional or representative republic because you can't trust the masses and democracy would always blow up in your face. You have to have the guys that, are at that time landowners and educated to be able to drive the whole thing home. I was reminded, by the way, when I was thinking about that, as I was trying to say that, the last scene in Game of Thrones when after everything blew up and Cersei ends up taking out obviously not Cersei, but I got the names mixed up when Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons and all of the rest took out, Cersei in the final battle at King's Landing. And after, Jon Snow, had to stab Cersei in the back to try to break the wheel, ironically, and all that stuff. For those of you who are super into Game of Thrones like I am, they, had the round table where they were trying to, well, they were knighting Brand the Great or whatever his name was. And, they had posed the question, not they, but, the guy who was, uh, uh, God, I'm going into this whole thing. I just hold on one second. We're trying to think about this. I was thinking of Samwell Tarly when he laid out to all of the you know the round table. Should we consider a democracy? And they were like, and they just started laughing out loud, and I thought that was hilarious. But it was really telling because, yeah, democracy is not an easy thing, especially when you don't have people that are informed, especially if they're not willing to rise to what's in their best interest. And we saw them completely played like a fiddle in the last election because of MAGA and all of that. It reveals, and it's just, we're that stupid, we're that gross, we're that horrific, we're that mean spirited. We would literally allow something like this to happen, and I think is the greatest country on earth and the greatest experiment in the history on earth. But you know, I can tell you that my Americanism, so to speak, it's less confident than it once was. I mean, I thought we were filled with dynamic geniuses that would always think in our best interest and, act accordingly. And nobody that would run for office would be so audacious as to do what we've seen, from the stuff I've mentioned earlier, be it dropping dung over American cities in an AI meme to literally ripping up the White House to looting over $5 billion on a salary of $460,000, guys, while, getting troops to the streets and ICE and all of these other things that are going on. I mean, guys, we're screwed, right? And that means that the midterms aren't going to save us. What's going to happen is a righteous, righty torrent of a tidal wave resurgence of the American people that are equipped with the truths that I'm telling you, with a plan to move forward, because that's what all of the signs collectively we're calling for on the No Kings throughout all of the No Kings that I've been a part of, as well as seeing on the signs from around the country that had 7 million people asking the right questions. So how are we going to solve this riddle? Okay, particularly as I just mentioned, the final quadrant of this, Rubik's cube is the perversion of power through the electoral college, and there are pathways to be able to, turn the tables on that as well. But I think it's important to note, as it relates to the electoral college, particularly in the 2020 election, that in addition to the insurrection, all things Trump that were going on, they had been involved with the forgeries of the electoral certifiers to try to steal the electoral college. So, how many of you guys recall that throughout this entirety of Trump's, lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate dance, he's always talking about forgeries and being set up? Yeah, he's blaming everybody for what he was doing. So they literally tried to use the Electoral College in addition to just the baked in sort of scenarios where Wyoming, with an exorbitant amount of billionaires, could have as much legislative influence in the state of California with 50 million Americans. That's what I'm talking about. So when you understand that you get to the precepts of the Clean New Deal. First, it deals with money. Okay, first and foremost. A lot of people hear Bernie Sanders and AOC and others talk about this, and I'll introduce this first. They usually introduce it second, but we got to end Citizens United. We got to get dark money out of politics, the shadow sector. Ask all of the victims of P. Diddy, if anything good happens in the shadows. I hate to use that disgusting reference, but I think you get my drift. That's one side of the equation. So we have to get legalized corruption out of our government, and that has to happen yesterday. Second, we have to have a new Glass-Steagall Act that actually deals with the issues that I'm talking about. And what that means is the Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial banking from commercial banking from investment banking. And you have to have an investment banking mentality in a capitalist system, and you have to have a place to house capital correctly in a capitalist system. But if you don't have aligned interest, basically you end up with gambling with other people's money, which is what we did in the Great Depression. We also did it in the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. And quite frankly, we've been doing it ever since. And the reason is because we got rid of regulation. We did deregulation, okay, at the highest levels that enabled these interests to merge to create these opaque scenarios where there's this casino going on that you don't know how the game works. And nor do you realize that you're on the menu. It's called predatory capitalism. And ultimately, what I am suggesting, not suggesting, I'm saying with every fiber of my being, is that we have to have a new Glass-Steagall Act because what we learned after the Great Depression, which was a very similar situation, in fact, almost step and repeat of what happened in 2008 and everything since, is that you have to align interests. You have to have investments modeled about what the business is versus all sorts of really devilish deception tactics that I don't want to go into at the moment. But here's the most important piece of it because it actually says this in the statutes of what created the exigent lending capacity of the Federal Reserve that could bail us out of any problem that we have. But ultimately, what it became was a bailout for crime. That's what we're talking about. Imagine in this situation with the NBA players and all of the major crime families that the NBA would, at the end of the day, after they bust this up, give the crime families all of the proceeds of all of the, some total of gambling throughout the whole season or something ridiculous like that. That's kind of what I'm talking about. And you have to have the statutes now say that one, you have to have the separation of commercial banking and investment banking, but you can't use the full faith and safety, the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee racketeering. That's just stupid. But that's what we did. And that's what none of you understand. And that's what nobody's talking about. And that's all we should be talking about. So the next version of what takes place in the Clean New Deal as a result of that, my friends, we've given $71 trillion illegally to this corrupt international cabal of a mafiocracy. If you want to call that capitalism, go ahead. That's not capitalism. Capitalism is risk reward, and that you invest and the best come to the table because they do their due diligence and they figure out and the victors go to the spoils, as opposed to this is all a setup. What we're in isn't all a setup, okay? And so everybody's talking about the national debt. They're talking about this, that, and the other, the government shutdown, and justifiably so. But again, nobody can see the big picture where it's like, okay, there's different debt, right? There's the government debt, and then there's, of course, the national debt. And the national debt is what all of us basically doing what many of us are being critical of the government of doing. But the government's not a household. The government can do a lot more than you and I can. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the government built on the soundness and safety of a financial system after going through 250 years of revolution and sacrifice and civil war and fight against fascism and civil rights and everything else to come up with this, great concept is our dynamism, and that's what we've kneecapped for corruption, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. When a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. So you can't use the full faith and credit of the United States, which is you, me, and everybody you see, to guarantee that which is destroying our lives. That would just be stupid. But that's what we've been doing. And I can assure you, Bernie Sanders knows this, but he hasn't been able to stop it, nor has he had the courage to. AOC doesn't understand this. I don't think anybody on the Democratic side does, except for maybe Chuck Schumer. I would say Nancy Pelosi did for sure. I don't even think Nancy Pelosi did, but they didn't understand because they still don't understand because it's opaque and it's unless you know all the ins and outs of why we created the Federal Reserve, how it functions, what the independence is supposed to be, and so on and so forth. Is it hard to get your head around this because it's not something they teach us in school? I had to go on this 13-year odyssey to get all of this information to discover, oh yeah, they illegally backdoored $71 trillion to float a global racketeering ring. And by comparison, think about if you made the biggest, dumbest mistakes in your life with your business or your home and everything else, and you destroy everything. And then all of a sudden the bank comes back to you and says, don't worry about it. We're going to give you 10X and you can do whatever the fuck you want. That'd be a nice world to live in. But that world doesn't exist for us. That exists for the system that's destroying us. So if we want to get rid of systemic prison and systemic racism in prisons, if we want to get rid of the fossil fuel paradigm and create an incredible renewable energy paradigm, if we want to create education and healthcare and all of the rest, my friends, 71 trillion is a starting point. And oh yeah, by the way, when you create a productive capacity, and this is what we knew from all things during World War II and Keynesian economics, because they had to do this to be able to float the military buildup to be able to fight and win World War II. The government invested and took out the debt on creating a productive economy where a rising tide raises all ships. And so when people are making money and they're paying taxes, then we can grow. That's just how this thing works. And so to be able to create a renewable energy paradigm and a new middle class, that's the only way you can do it. And you find the money based on the $71 trillion that I found. And this isn't hyperbole. This isn't make believe. Again, compare it to the $7 million that's on the front page of the New York Times today and try to do the math. Okay. Because it's extraordinary. So the final pieces of the puzzle are that we've got to end qualified immunity. I think that cops should be able to shoot to kill, just like maybe they should have been able to shoot to kill during the insurrection. But if they're, shooting on behalf of a white supremacist movement to kill minorities, they should be held accountable. And I'm sure millions of you agree with that. As it relates to judicial immunity, maybe we just have the caveat it's for the Supreme Court because of what we're seeing. But you got to have some sort of accountability for the powers that are determining the law, because otherwise, that's why these guys are able to get away with the corruption they're able to get away with. It's absolutely madness. So you got to end judicial corruption. You got to end presidential immunity, which is absolutely insane because it is about no kings. And then, of course, we got to, retool, not retool. We just got to end the electoral college, and I could go into that further. But a couple of other pieces of the puzzle that you want to find that are the final remedy to this situation. We got to end, well, let's put it this way. We got to get 13 justices on the Supreme Court to balance out the Roberts Court, which is pure corruption, and we got to turn the tables. And that's what we have to do because it is a war, okay, with our system and the judicial system. Then we have to end insider trading um, so that nobody in Congress can front run on stocks that the government is going to knowingly put into motion so that they could see stocks rise of companies that obviously are going to be in cahoots, like military, industrial companies, and that sort of thing. That's just pure corruption. And then, we could talk about term limits, but there's so much more. But guys, obviously, a lot going on. If you don't really pull the curtain back to unleash your understanding of how this whole thing works, then you're just, being led to slaughter. And that's all there is to it. When you, me, and everyone you see who wasn't a Nazi, who believes in liberty and justice and dignity and decency, integrity and beauty and sustainability, when we merge in unity behind the Clean New Deal, it's our destiny to purge the misery of tyranny and unleash the renaissance of possibility. So thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share, and do it like your life depends on it. It does. Thank you.